I've been a consultant now in various forms for about 25 years, but I've had quite a security route through to becoming a consultant. My first 10 years was working for IBM, and I brought new products to market. So the labs would develop new ideas, new technology, and it would be my responsibility to understand that and apply it to existing IBM customers, but also to actually push out, gain new customers and get new markets. And I did a lot of what you would just consider to be strategy work in doing that. So I looked at new market opportunities, worked with software vendors, worked with our own organisation, but mostly worked with C-level contacts within our clients and prospects to help them work out their business and then their IT strategy and help them implement it through the IBM services. So with all of that background, I also studied at INSEAD and went on different training programs through IBM, and it gave me a really strong basis in understanding strategic challenges that organisations have. Strategic decision making, operational decision making, and how to operationalize those key directive decisions, and also transformations. So I had a lot of experience, and I realised that at the point where IBM procured PwC, I was quite senior in IBM. And I was suddenly surrounded by PwC partners who were at the same level as me, but I was, in my eyes, far junior. I was probably about 20, 25 years less experienced than they were, but having the same responsibilities. So I thought, well, okay, I need to go and get some grey hair and actually experience things as a consultant rather than just talk about it. So I became a consultant, and we talk briefly about the difference between a consultant and a management consultant. So in my humble view, a consultant tends to be somebody who has a specialization in a particular area. So an HR consultant, a marketing consultant, an IT consultant, or even more specialist than that. So you could be an ERP consultant. And you tend to have a deep specialization in that area. Management consultants tend to have a wider breadth of experience. They tend to have more strategic, complex challenges to have. They don't necessarily have, they're not selling necessarily specialism, but they're having business problem solving skill sets that look wider. And so they have to have wider general knowledge and wider experience. So they tend to be more senior and have possibly grown up through a particular consulting specialization, having had exposure across multiple disciplines. So I was very fortunate in that I actually came into the consulting world at the management consulting level because of the work I'd done at IBM. And the company that I chose, again, was slightly different because we were client side, which means we gave advice to the client or acted on behalf of the client. Whereas a lot of consultancies sell a capability to a client and it's in a project team or it's delivering a solution or recommendation to the client, you're not working as if you were the client. So again, that was slightly different. But the company that I worked with were senior experts in management consultancy. They were from the top, what was then 6 consulting companies, as well as Bain and McKinsey. So they were the top tier, and they'd broken away from those organisations to form their own consulting company. So that was a really great exposure for a few years, and then they were purchased by a large organisation who wanted to get into the consulting industry. So I spent 10 years or so doing that in various forms, so strategic consulting, and project delivery, problem troubleshooting, and it gave me great exposure, good insight. There were lots of mistakes made, I'm sure, lots of fun as well. And the last 5 years, I've run my own company, and and we turned that company into a software company over the last 3 years. So I still do a little bit of consultancy on the side, but and obviously working with you guys has been brilliant. So let's head to some of those questions. So challenges and problems consultants have. I think the biggest challenge that I've faced is, particularly because I'm a management consultant and not a specialist. In specialist areas, you learn and you develop your skills and experience on one client, and then the next client, say for example, your CRM, customer relationship manager consultant, you will go in and you will work from possibly the same software platform, and the client's different. Or you might be an industry expert, so you'll work in the industry, so you'll have that knowledge. But the thing with a management consultant is that you never quite know what you're going to be thrown into. And you could be thrown into a different company, industry, different challenge, different area of the business. So lots of things are new, and what you have to rely on is your own having confidence in your own ability to work through a problem. And I think when you're a consultant, it's easy to believe that the person, the organisation needs you to immediately have the answer. And it's an unrealistic expectation that you have. If you're a subject matter expert, that's different. But equally, a lot of companies believe they are special and they're individual. So even when you get a commonality of theme, whether it be industry or area of the business or technology, they all deserve the respect for consideration of their own particular unique environment. So whilst there's a lot of pressure on consultants to give an answer that's going to solve all the problems, it's okay to take a step back and just survey and peruse what is actually going on in that particular situation, and then bring your tools, then bring your knowledge to bear. Because otherwise you're making too many assumptions, and that doesn't do either yourself or the organisation any particular favours. And that brings me into the what to do when you don't know what to do. And I think the biggest thing there is to sit back and, I'm a problem solver and I want to make things better. That's very innate in my nature. It was how I behaved as a child, and it's driven me all the way through. So for me, using my problem solving skills, using my strategic element of my brain, looking at things very logically, breaking things down task by task, question by question, this needs to be achieved, right? What do we need to do in order to achieve X? Well, these things will drive that, right? What's going to make those things successful? And keep unwrapping layer by layer what those answers are. And if you don't know what those answers are, the other wonderful thing about consultancy is that you're allowed to research. And research can be in the form of internet researching, web-based researching, desk-based researching, or it can be, if you're an organisation, asking your colleagues. The thing that I really enjoy is accepting that I may not know the answer, or accepting that actually working with people who have got brilliant brains and asking them, well, what would you do? What's your experience? Is really, really good, because it opens your eyes up to what the art of the possible can be, and gives you a fresh perspective. But most importantly, especially when you're a management consultant, you're the only person from your company with the client, and you're the one that they're looking to come up with the answer. And so having colleagues around you, they could be in the same organisation, or they could be people that you've met in this programme, or it could be other people that you know. But talking to other people is a really great way of exploring your own ideas, but also bringing theirs to bear. So what do you do when you don't know what to do? Is not panic. You break things down step by step, start at the base question, roll things back, do your research, and gradually a picture will emerge. And the other big thing is, when you don't know what to do, or as you're moving forward, is to keep checking back in with the client. The client will have lots of ideas. And one of the things that I think consultancies forget is to respect the intelligence of the client, because these people have been doing the job, they've got their own ideas, they may have their own agendas, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute, but they will appreciate being asked. Now, there's an old gag, and I'm sure you've all heard it, that a consultant is somebody who you ask the time of and they ask to borrow your watch and tell you the time with your watch. So I'm not talking about that, but I am suggesting that they will know what's worked before, and then they will know what hasn't worked. And one of the things that drives me slightly insane about consulting companies in general, having had the responsibility for delivering and being paid on successful projects, one of the things that consultants don't tend to do is be paid whether or not the project fails or not. And one of the ambitions that consulting companies have is to get as much revenue from a client as possible. And that, in my mind, can lead to some not great behaviour, hence why I chose to work for a boutique company. Now, my first part of my career, I was always paid on success. Success of a project, success of a deal, success of client satisfaction and profit. So it was never in my makeup to milk something. I always wanted to deliver to the problem. And the important piece on that is to always check back in with the client as to whether you're doing so or not. When I was working with people in a particular industry area, it was in the financial services sector. They were implementing a large project, and they were having to write an organizational structure, and they wanted to change the organization to that new structure, and they wanted to put in new processes and systems to support that. And that all sounded like a good idea because there was regulatory pressure to do so. The problem came that the organization had done this, but had done this 2 or 3 times over. And we were just the latest version of consultants coming in to do so. And there was one experience where the client just said, look, here's a document that the previous consultants did, just put your name on that and job done. But that happens so many times, not literally that, but organizations will say we need a change, and what happens is that they commission one organization or a part of another organization or a third party to come up with that change and that recommendation, and then through people moving in senior roles, they reject or they don't take forward that recommendation, and then the same team will come in, or sorry, a similar team from a different company will come in, and they'll do exactly the same engagement, talk to exactly the same stakeholders in the company, and then the stakeholders will tell them the same information, and then the report will be pretty much the same recommendation but with another picture on top, another company logo. And so my point is this: don't try, and if some good thinking has happened, pick up from that and deliver forward. Because if the company spends time and money getting you to redo thinking that's already happened, it's wasting your time, it's wasting their money, it's also insulting the guys that are actually going to make it successful, the client. So you need to take them with you, and you need to build on what is already known and accepted within the organisation. Whether that be visible to all of the management or not, it's your responsibility to bring that information through. Funny stories and unforgettable projects. So I think one of the projects that I'm not necessarily proudest of, but I have my own sort of, wow, I can't believe I'm here moment. But there's a few actually. So the one that I was going to tell you about was I worked for this consulting company, and we were commissioned by the UK MOD. So that's the department responsible for running the army and the army, navy and fleet air group themselves. And we were asked to look at how we could improve the command and control part of the operation. So when the government says we want to deploy, how does that filter through into, so executive command, how does that filter into commissioning troops and setting them all up for success? How does the how do they operate within peacetime? How do they subsume new activities and responsibilities? So it was really an operational challenge as to how to distribute resources against the various responsibilities that the MOD had. It was a huge question. We were a small team of 5 and we had 3 months to answer it. And you start that going, wow, okay, I can't believe that I'm lucky enough to be on this kind of project. But also, how on earth are we going to do this? Because there's no way we've got time or resources to interview people. I wasn't an expert in any of these areas, although we had a couple of experts on the project. Anyway, we were sitting there scratching our heads and wondering what on earth we were going to be doing with this project. And I was looking amongst my colleagues and we were all wondering the same. How did we manage to get picked for this? Both excited and a little bit daunted. And in walked the gentleman who was responsible for setting up the Prince 2 way of managing projects, which then also morphed into managing successful projects, MSP. Now, he was absolutely brilliant. I've had a long passion for having, as a consultant, having a responsibility to make an impact on a client. And I'm less concerned about administrative material. And I had a bit of a beef in my bonnet about this because I'd just become a consultant fresh from the commercial side. And I used to have a long-term battle with the project managers that I worked with, who used to present me wonderful, wonderful documents. And I said, yes, but you haven't spoken to the client. You haven't delivered the core product. You haven't done the essence of your job. So I don't care that you've got, 20 ring binders full of wonderful documentation. No one's going to read that. What have you done to make people's lives better? And I asked him, why did we get as a profession, why are we so caught up in this? Because it turned out that he had written the Prince 2 and MSP not for the purposes that it currently is being used for, but actually as a way of helping, it was the UK government, to compare the progress of different projects. And it was supposed to be a very light touch. And it was, what is the business case? What is the budget? What are the resources? Who are the stakeholders? And what is the progress? And what are you delivering? And what's the outcome you're looking for? Some very basic questions. And each one of those had a simple write-up that you'd get in the project scope and the documents and tools that you've been shown on this project. And he said, but then what happened? So that was in the 1960s. And then what happened was people saw this as a way of covering themselves, protecting themselves. So if I can write a whole load of documents, if I can show that I've written a great stakeholder strategy, I may never talk to a stakeholder, but as long as I've got a great strategy, we can tick that off as a deliverable. And that's, that's half the job, isn't it? And so all of a sudden, people hid behind these documents, these wave of documents. When I was working in, I was the innovation manager for something called Business Link, which was a part of government that worked with small and medium-sized companies to support them and their growth. And these organisations relied on the government for information about the law and tax requirements, etc. But they also relied on the government for best practice because they couldn't afford consultants. So Business Link was a little bit like a consultancy that the government provides for businesses. And my job was to make this, to improve the service and to take the ideas from the small and medium businesses about how they want government to support them. So lots of project ideas would come in and I'd filter them and prioritise them and allocate them to people to deliver. But HMRC, who the tax element of the UK government, they were managing this. They were custodians of this part of government. they required us to complete lots of documentation to prove that we were delivering value. And I would have a budget of, say, £100,000 for one of my projects, because they were small, they were digital based, so they were quite small content based projects. But 60 to 70% of my budget would go on people having to complete the documents for the process, and 30% of my budget would go on people actually doing the project. So that's how crazy some of this stuff can get. So my advice, which was massively endorsed by this guy, was to just do the documentation to aid you and to aid communication, not for the sake of it. So that was a really good lesson. We went on to use what he then had created, which was something called soft systems analysis. And soft systems analysis is a business analysis tool where you ask very logical questions about how, who, why, and the efficacy. So is the way you're doing, is the process effective? So why are you doing this? What is the outcome you wish to achieve? Who's doing it? What resources do they need? And is it effective? And with those 5 questions, we were able to break down how the organisation was working and how it should work. And they are 5 great tools for any consultant, because with those, you can then start drilling down the logic. So even something that's truly, truly difficult like that, you can break it down. We used that same approach for a project that was in the headlines that was having a torrid time, a really awful time. It was the NHS. So in the UK, the NHS is obviously the National Health Service, and it's broken down into different regions that are all completely disengaged from each other. So all of the IT systems, as you can probably imagine, were acquired by individual hospitals and individual doctors, and individual groups of doctors, individual groups of hospitals. They're called trusts. So everything was very individual. So if I live where I live, but if I went on holiday somewhere else in the UK and ended up in hospital, my doctor would never know about it, because my record doesn't follow me around. I don't have, I have a unique NHS number, but there is no central system to record me on it. So what we did, or what the government did, was commission something called the Spine Project, so that there could be one system that would recognise me as a patient, regardless of where I worked in the UK, or where I was or hurt in the UK. And this seems like a brilliant and obvious idea, and why on earth don't we have it? And surely my record should go with me if I move location, if I move house, so that anybody treating me will always have my up-to-date record. It feels like a very obvious, simple thing to do. The UK government spent, I want to say billions on it. I don't think I'm far off by saying that. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of millions. And it got to the stage where it was hitting the headlines almost, it felt like every week, but it was certainly very, very popular in terms of a theme. And it was being used to bash the incumbent government by the opposition. So it was a very politically charged subject. And it was massively over budget, this project. So we were brought in to analyse why it wasn't working. And again, we weren't experts in this, but because we were management consultants, they trusted us to have an independent view. We weren't associated with any of the companies who were doing it. And it was Accenture and PwC and the like of those. IBM was another group. So there was 5. What they've done is that they'd broken the UK into 5 different regions. And if you have a data flow, you need to have commonality of data structure. You need to have A has to equal A. A can't equal B. A has to equal A. Otherwise, I can't transfer that data. And so, what the what the central spine team did, the client spine team did, is they asked for the bids from each of these 5 regions from these companies to propose how they would deliver their part of this spine. But their client didn't provide any architecture. They didn't say how we're going to structure the data. They didn't say what software protocols were going to be used. They didn't say what software systems had to be used. They gave free for all to these systems integrators to propose, and then they accepted the best price, the best offer, whatever it was. So then when you get all of these things, and one person would have proposed a banana, somebody else an apple, somebody else a pear, somebody a chip, somebody a bun, and you try and pull them together, there's no commonality. You cannot move between them. And it didn't really it doesn't take much logic to realize the mistake, but the commercial setup, the contractual setup, the procurement process that government required meant that the core architecture wasn't there in the first place, because they wanted the contractors to take on the commercial risk, but also the contractors wouldn't share, and they weren't obligated, they weren't forced to share any of the information between themselves. So you just had 5 groups of people, of organizations, carrying out these projects, and of course no data can flow. That was about 12 years ago, and to be perfectly honest, I've got no idea whether they've actually resolved it, because it was going to cost an awful lot of money to resolve, and they may well have abandoned that. But that project was amazing to work on, because it was really interesting. It was high profile because it was in the paper, and no one on the outside could figure out why this project wasn't working. And then when you start unraveling it and ask the really simple questions, the 5 questions that I talked about before, the answer is very, very obvious. And you have to be aware of the political implication as well, because people who have done things in best faith in their jobs were going to have people not very happy with them. So, presenting back findings, you have to be quite sensitive to. In fact, the worst case, and I learned this lesson really, really hard way. I was working as on my own on this particular occasion, and the challenge was to advise a company, a commercial company in the defence industry, on how they on whether they should enter a new market. Now, let's pretend they made planes. They didn't make planes, but let's pretend they made planes. They made other stuff. And in planes, they had to train people how to use the systems, and how to, engineers on how to service these planes. So within the company, they had a training element. And what they thought was, well, if we've got trainers, surely we can not just have this as part of our service for our main offering, the main offering being planes. Surely we can take this this offering and create a business in its own right that has its own P&L, so that we can have a contribution from them and they can market themselves independently of us. And that was the ambition of several of the directors on the board. And it was certainly the ambition of the people who were carrying out the training as it was, because it would mean that they would create their own business, they would be promoted, and they would obviously further their own careers. So, but other parts of the business were saying, well, look, we've got to keep to our core area, and we're not sure about that area, that market at all. We don't really have the experience. We're just very good at training for our own products, not training in general, because training the army in general is a very different kettle of fish. So they were basically having a board argument, and the only way they were going to solve this was by bringing in somebody who was going to be independent, and that happened to be me. So I did my market research. It wasn't an area I was familiar with, but I went through the process of market analysis. It was things that I'd done in the past, so that was all fine, and I had my research. And I interviewed all of the interested parties, all of the client side people, as well as the experts that I found in the marketplace, because I had to really, really listen to what those guys were saying, because it was going to affect them. It was going to affect some of them as to whether they got promoted, and some of them whether they even had a job. But I also, you know, they were very nice to me on both sides, because they were trying to win me over to their arguments. But I had to make sure that I was completely impartial all the time, and was aware of the bias that was being presented to me in the arguments, because people had their own agendas. So, you know, one of the questions that we've got here is how do you put in a persuasive argument? And you know, the answer is very simple. You keep it to data. Keep it to data. Make sure that you've got evidence for everything you say, and make sure that the analysis follows a logical construct, that there is an argument all the way through. So you're like a detective, and making sure that all of your sources are credible sources and sources that can't be disputed. So data is really important. Analysis of data is very important. But you've also got to be aware of the bias of the people in the room. And I was very, very much aware of the biases of the people that I was interviewing. I wasn't aware of the bias of the person who was paying for my contract. So one of the things that I did was I did my research, and it was all data driven. It was so it was qualitative and quantitative. So the qualitative came from interviews, and I attributed and made readers aware of the bias. I looked at forecasts, I looked at capability, I looked at market opportunity and barriers, I looked at the return on investment, and also looking at the feasibility of actually creating the offering against competition, and whether it had unique USPs that can be used, and the critical success factors for deployment. So everything was all outlined, and the feasibility was looked at as well as the market opportunity. So that was a really thorough piece of work, and everyone was delighted with the logic and the approach, because I checked in with all different parts, and everybody knew that I was going to be independent, and everybody was supportive. Nobody knew what my conclusion was going to be, but everyone was supportive. So I had a meeting set up with the board, and I put in my final comments, but I needed some information about revenue forecast from my sponsor, and he hadn't given it to me. And I was running out of time, and I said, okay, look, can you enter these details in, if I give you the presentation a couple of days beforehand, can you turn it around and then send it back to me? And he said, of course, and he'd been great all the way through. I had no reason to believe that wouldn't be the case. But as I got nearer and nearer and nearer to the board meeting, and he hadn't returned my presentation, and I called and I emailed, and I was working remotely because I was actually on another project by this time. And it got to the point, to the day of the meeting, I still hadn't got it. And then he gave it to me as we entered the boardroom. And you can imagine how worried I was, because I'd done this great piece of work over the last couple of months. I'd been really thorough, and I was just missing a couple of data points to wrap up my presentation. And he gave it to me in the meeting. And so I had to, literally, as I was pressing the button, I was thinking, please it be the next slide I'm expecting. And what he'd done is he'd changed the order. He hadn't put in the information, and he'd changed the conclusion. Not ultimately the conclusion, but he'd changed the conclusion. So my conclusion was they didn't invest. But there are some other sub-messages in there that he had altered. So my huge takeaway from that was, if it's your project, if it's your report, even though you have to hand it and review it with a client, don't ever give them control of the final report. PDF it. Because although this person should never have done what he did to me in that boardroom, and I was so cross, he was there to save his job, and he didn't care that I was feeling like I did, and I felt the integrity of my report had been undermined. He was saving his job and the job of a couple of his colleagues, and that was what was important to him. So I learned a very, very uncomfortable lesson in that. No harm was ultimately done, and he got to save his credibility. But yeah, just don't make that mistake. PDF any final presentations that you're going to make. Right, how to convince your client. So we've talked about that. I've jumped over women in the workplace. We've got a few ladies on. Before I started this with you guys, I actually had a chat with a lady who was in a friend's company, because she was struggling. She was probably 5 years into her career as a project manager, and was feeling like she was being ignored by the males that were in her team, who were probably more senior than her. And if I'm really honest, being a woman in consultancy has always been tough. And I'd hoped up until that point that the kind of experiences I'd had on my way weren't being echoed, but I have to say that they still are. There's a lot more respect for women in the workplace, and that is increasing, but it isn't a given. And we all get judged in how we present ourselves and how we come across. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it's human nature. And so I think women in the workplace, it's definitely improving, but consulting is one of the hardest areas to be in. And it's my own experience is the majority of the women that I was in consulting with have had to leave consultancy, because it gets to a point in your career that logistically and the level of commitment it takes, it's very hard. And I know a lot of women have had to choose family over career, unless they're lucky enough to have a nanny. And being a senior female consultant can certainly afford a nanny. So it's tricky. It's not straightforward. It's a really good career to have as a consultant, and I'm sure it is improving, but it's still a journey, and it's still a journey. I mean, there's probably, I know there's women out there who've written books on techniques, and I think the biggest thing that I would say is have faith in yourself. But I would say that whether you're male or female, because we all get judged, and we all have our own stories, we all have our own perspectives. And I think if the next generation can not hold that judgment over, but listen to what people are actually saying, I think we would be standing in very good stead. And then we wouldn't have to have the women in the workplace conversation, or any other minority in the workplace. We could just respect each other as professionals. So that is a good ambition to have, but and it's only going to come into reality if you guys have that view, and also hold other people who don't necessarily to account, which is happening all over the world. We've just got to make sure that we do that as well in the workplace, and we're respectful of each other. Right, next question. Degrees, education or experience, which matters more? So clearly you're all sitting here with your degrees. So absolutely degrees matter, because it shows a level of capability. It shows that you can answer those key questions, that you're logical, you're able to research, you're able to work independently and manage your own time, all of the great skills that you need for a consultant. There comes a point though where experience matters. And doing an internship, I think, is a fantastic thing to do because you're getting very practical experience. I was fortunate enough when I did my degree, I chose a business degree, and then I had a year as an intern with IBM, which gave me a kickstart to my career. My friends who chose more vocational subjects, so English literature, not the English language, but English literature, or geography, or media studies, with some of them. And they all struggled to get their first jobs. So I had a good 2 or 3 years on them in their career immediately because my degree was vocational. And more importantly than that, because I'd done work experience in it and meaningful work experience, just as you guys are doing, I was able to say and prove to recruiters that I had this experience. And so amongst the graduates, it was the experience that elevated me, not the degree. So I would always say, now you've got your degrees, get as much experience as possible. Internships, volunteering, working for friends' companies, setting up your own business, doing charity things. Duke of Edinburgh is an amazing thing. I don't, that's not something you guys probably do, but an equivalent which shows I'll say practical experience. I don't mean like hand experience, but professional experience. Because what you need to do is gather as many skills as possible, sorry, around you, and then you can showcase who you actually are and what you've achieved. If you can say, I've raised this much for charity, I've organised this event, I've had this impact on a company, I've coached somebody, I volunteer here, that's so much more meaningful because organisations are looking for people who have got a can-do, roll up your sleeve and get on with it, who are independent thinkers, who are independent doers, who will take ideas and carry them forward. They want problem solvers. So I was, the refrain, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. I don't have time for problems, but I'll get behind your solution and support you all the way. And that's what organisations are looking for. So absolutely, experience really matters. So things you should do while looking for a job. Well, I've just said a few of them. If you're unsure, look back at the things that you enjoy, and try and be helpful to third parties. You've all got a lot of experience, a lot of ideas, I'm sure, but you've also probably got friends, relatives and contacts of theirs that you can get involved with, you can volunteer with, that you can provide an extra pair of hands. So it's making yourself visible and present and acquiring those experiences so that you put them on your CV, you put them on your LinkedIn profile, so that when you get the chance to be interviewed, you stand out from the crowd. What to do when you don't know what career path to choose. And that is a tricky one, because I don't, if people had if people had the ability to predict for everyone where they were going to end up, that would be fantastic. We haven't got that. What we've got are systems that use keywords, and they force you into various routes. And I think the biggest thing for you to reflect on as you're having all of these different experiences is, what do I enjoy most? What can I get behind and really excited about? Because this is something that you're going to do for a period. The lovely thing is for you guys is that there's a recognition careers aren't for life. You will probably have 3 or 4 careers during your overall career. I've already had, I'm on my 3rd now, I guess. They've all got a theme though, because my theme is IT and improving the world for individuals and businesses. So whatever I do, whichever shape, is always somewhere circling around improving things, improving the business. but so, you know, reflect on what you get excited about. It could be about, you know, making the world a cleaner, safer place. It might be about using your creativity. It could be more about problem solving. It's about reflecting on what makes you you. If you can get an understanding of who you are and what you're naturally good at, that's a really good place to start. I'm assuming by the fact that you're all interns on here, you all have an interest in business. And I'm sure by the fact that you're going through this process that you're able to move into a form of consulting world. But, you know, that you can have consulting roles inside an organization as much as you can, you know, if you don't get a job with the big names. But you don't have to start there. You've got lots of smaller organizations as well. You can start off as an administrator to learn the ropes of a business. So it's about feeling your way in if you're not sure, and starting somewhere. Your degree will open you up. But when you do get to recognize where you enjoy, go for the experience and then go and see if they've got qualifications in that particular area. I was asked by somebody whether or not they should follow another master's degree in the area or follow the professional qualification route. And I would say always the professional qualification route, because like the practical experience, companies are wanting to know, not are you just good at learning, but are you good at applying that learning? And that's what the professional qualification will give you. So play to your strengths and where your interests are, and, you know, beyond that, practical experience. Right. Teamwork. How to work in a team. So it's an old adage that together we're better. And I talked about it a little bit before at the beginning, that as consultants, you're going to be thrown into lots of different areas. And if you think about it as an, I have got to get this right, I've got to have the answer, that's a huge pressure, and an unrealistic pressure, because, you know, even the guys who've got some serious experience will not necessarily have come across situations before. And if they assume they have, then they're probably doing the client a bit of a disservice. So the first thing is to surround yourself with team members, and respect the fact that you've got team members. You're not alone, you are part of a team. And, you know, when those who are on my team, the first thing you need to do is to discover who your team are. You know, are they, who are they, what are their interests, what are they good at, what do they enjoy, how can we mesh as a team? You're going to have some people who are hugely creative, some people who are detail orientated, some people who are great motivators, people who are going to be quiet, somebody who is great at speaking, somebody who's great at writing. Everyone's going to come with their different strengths and their experiences, and every voice is important, because you can create your own sounding board together. You can create new ideas. You know, I reckon that amongst your team that you're currently working on, given the chance, most people by themselves will get to 80%, but you'll all be a different 80%. So only when do you come as a team do you get 100%. So that's, you know, having the right attitude is the right thing. Oh, so Mohammed, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Teresa. I actually have quite a few questions, if you don't mind. This conversation is really interesting, and it just brings so many questions to my mind.
I can continue with my list. So I'm very happy to stop and take your questions.
Okay, I just wanted to go back to one of the points you were mentioning about a consultant getting stuck and figuring out a way to solve the problem. One of the methods you mentioned was to ask friends or people who are smarter or who have more experience in the field, right? If the person who might help is not within the same company, is it an appropriate thing to do, to ask them for help?
If you know them, yes. If you don't know them, ask. People are flattered when they're approached. And sometimes you might need to give them a commercial incentive if you're working within a program that has budget for that. Yeah.
You have to give them a commercial incentive to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But by all means ask. People love helping and love talking about what they know.
Yes. In consulting, do you often work individually or in a team? And if you do work individually, what are your advices to be excellent in such thing? Because I know working in a team has so many advantages, one of which is like to brainstorm with others, but it feels more challenging to work on business problems individually.
Yeah.
I just want your advice on that.
So I never think of myself as on my own. Because going back to the conversation we've just had, you know, if I'm working for a consulting company, I have my consulting colleagues to go back and ask. I will probably have a director who's sold the project in the first place to place me there, who I can go back and ask. But again, you know, consultants are thinkers. We like problems, and there's nothing better for us if we're probably stuck on our own things. So actually, thinking about somebody else's problem, you've got a distance that helps you give a better perspective, and vice versa. So have a coffee, well, a virtual coffee with somebody, and it helps to also unclog your own thinking. So yeah, I would never consider yourself alone unless you are truly independent, and then even then you'd still have contacts and you'd still have a network where you, if you were stuck, you'd pick up the phone to somebody. So yeah, you're never truly alone.
You mean even if you're not speaking about the problem, just being with the network helps you have fresh ideas, right?
Yeah, yeah. And researching, reading the latest information. If you're particularly in a specialist area, there's a lot of groups on LinkedIn that talk about the latest thinking. There's publications like Harvard Business Review and the like that will talk about the latest approaches. Companies in the area that you're in, so software companies or so companies that service those industries, they'll also have thought leading things. And you'll find on a lot of consulting websites as well, competitive websites, they'll also publish thought leadership. So there's lots of places where you can get ideas from that will help you unpick.
That's great, thank you. If nobody has questions, I have two more questions. Go ahead, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, I was muted.
I
Okay. Hi, Teresa. First of all, I wanted to ask you about a point you said that it's okay to be lost at first as a consultant when dealing with a problem. My question is, how do I know that my, let's say, end recommendation hasn't been thought of by the client? And yeah, by that, I'd be wasting their time.
Okay, so if you come up with 1 and 1 equals 2 and they've already thought of that,
Yeah.
you don't want to tell them that, do you? So if you come up at that at the end of the process, it's a little bit tricky. The way you avoid that is you ask the question up front. So what have you considered? What have you learned? You know, I gave that example where consultancies, one after the other, were being paid to answer the same question, and they just basically could have just changed their logos and written the same report. If you ask, what work has already been done on this? Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, I want to build on something. And it's okay, because the answer a couple of years ago may be the right answer now, but the timing was wrong, or there was another priority in the business. So it could still be okay, 1 and 1 equals 2 could still be the right answer, but the difference being timing, resources, leadership. But you need to know that. And so ask those upfront questions as soon as possible, as soon as it's appropriate. because it's out of respect, of the client, because to your point, you don't want to waste their time.
Yeah, that's right. But maybe getting feedback from some clients isn't as easy than others. Like a client would expect answers rather than have to tell you exactly what to do.
Yeah, and it's funny because different types of consulting companies and different types of projects could lead to that situation. The companies that I have always worked for have a much more open client side approach. So we're on the client's team. You will get in some situations that the task is to go away, write a report, write the recommendations and present the recommendations. And we're not going to engage. We need you to be completely independent of us. And that's hard. You just got to go with the, well, this is our view, and have to stand by it. But if you base that on evidence and data and proper analysis, then that's the risk that the client is going to have to take, that you're going to come up with an answer they're not going to agree with. And that will be managed by whoever is managing the client relationship and the project, the commercial side of the project for you. So as a consultant, unless that's your role, I wouldn't worry. Your job is to do great research, great analysis, and a very logical conclusion.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Mahmoud, you want to go back to your question?
Thank you. If you have other questions, you can ask, because I already asked 2 questions.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Teresa, I just wanted to ask, from your experience, if someone is really passionate about consulting and cracking down problems, but couldn't find a job in consultancy, what would you recommend that they do to continue or pursuing that passion?
It's a really good question. So my immediate response is, keep trying, because getting into the big names is difficult. You need to have the attitude, why shouldn't it be me? So you've got to give it to somebody. I'm just as deserving, so give it your best shot. And I know people have applied and applied and applied, and on the 3rd or 4th or 5th time it's worked. There's different roles within these organizations as well to apply to, so if that's your dream, keep pursuing. Networks are great. You never know who knows somebody, and this is a great network as well, and I know Niran and the team as well are looking to expand that. You guys are ahead of the game because you've already got credibility, you've got the internship, you've already gone through a selection process. So I would say drop down a tier of the types of consulting that you want to talk to. And, if I look around where I live, there's probably 2 or 3 dozen small consulting companies that are there. So I would make yourself known to those smaller companies and just say, look, I'm an extra pair of hands. I can do you a short-term internship to help with the project. And so, even though you don't have a role at the moment, you'll get to know me, I can be helpful, and you get yourself known that way. And I think, whilst you're looking, that's a really good thing to do, because at the very least you're acquiring more experience. You can say, I've worked with this consulting company, and again, that will stand you out from the general group. So that's what I would do, and yeah, keep offering support and advice to consulting companies. If you're really brave, I would also, if you know companies that you could work for, as in that kind of way as well, I would do that. Because at the moment, in the old stage of your careers, you're just needing to be a sponge and soak up experience wherever you can grab it. Any other questions? Sorry, did that answer your question, first of all?
Yes, that was a great answer. Thank you so much. Yeah, very, very insightful.
Anybody else got any questions?
Okay, I have another question, maybe a bit out of subject, but I want to ask it. What advice would you give someone who's uh, looking for an internship after this one abroad? Like, I know that many trainees here in Saudi graduated from Saudi universities, and these are unknown, let's say, in the UK or the US. Uh, how would you give advice about going, maybe applying for international internships, and how would you give yourself credibility?
I feel slightly unable to answer that question. Probably, I think I think Mira might be better placed. I would, I think across the globe there are the top tier internationally known universities, aren't there?
Yeah.
And they exist in all different regions, and we all probably are very aware of each of them. If you've studied at those, they will carry some gravitas, and I understand that and appreciate that, and that's probably well known within the recruitment of graduates. So that's almost like a given. And then you get the next group, which the majority of people study in, and it's almost, for the majority of recruiters, the fact that you've got a degree puts you on equal footing with everybody else. And in some cases, they don't even look at the university that you're coming from. They're much more interested in the subject area and your extracurricular experience. So I personally wouldn't worry about that too much. But I think your other question is more specific about how to get into other internships, etc. And that's not a world I'm familiar with. So Niran might be better placed to ask that question, or through Lara. I have to be honest.
That was a really good answer. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Right, have I got questions? Oh, yes, so Ali's just talking about going to the United Nations in Geneva. That would be an amazing experience. Has anybody else got any questions?
Mahmoud, you're done? Go ahead.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Sorry, I asked so many questions today.
I love it. It's fine. It's good.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, from your great experience, do you, as a consultant, have occasions where you don't have a heavy load of work on, like, solving problems, or not at all? Does it happen that you don't have a problem to work on? And if you do, what do you do?
What do I do if what happens?
If you don't have a problem to solve?
Oh, okay. So well, so projects are sold, and when they're being sold, going through the process of being sold, you're someone like a resource manager who's responsible for allocating people onto different projects will place you on your different projects, and they will have a view as to how much work you've got going, and they'll try and keep you at about 100%. But you can't predict when these projects are going to start and finish necessarily, because it's all about negotiating contracts, etc. So you'll have a rough idea how many projects you're on. I think my maximum was on 3, and they were all supposed to be full-time. So I had to do some very clever juggling for a few weeks as one project went down, another project started, and I was delivering a third. And myself and the resource manager knew that, my delivery directors knew that. And I personally loved that. I had no other responsibility, and that was fine. But there are other times when your project can require you to. Every project has a life cycle. So at the start, it's comfortable, it's easy. I'm getting to know my subject, I'm getting to know my client, I'm doing my research, I can manage my own time. And then you get the phase of the project where you're scratching your head, going, okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this bit. So you have a bit of a panic. And then you get the next phase where you're going to do some interviews and some investigation, and that you feel a bit calm again, and you can manage your diary, and that's fine. And then you go, I'm running out of time, and people are putting pressure on me. And so now I've got to ramp up the workload again, and I've got weekends and evenings. And so the experience goes up and down in a project. And then if you're dovetailing that with another project that is coming in that you're starting, then you're going to get those two experiences side by side. And one's going to feel calm, so I'm feeling relaxed this afternoon, and tomorrow's going to feel like hell. And actually on Friday afternoon, no one needs me, so I'm going to take a couple of hours off and, you know, just chill out. And that's the life of a consultant. You're going to get the ebbs and flows, and you've got to figure out your working time around. There was one project which, when I was doing as an intern, where the UK government had people bidding for the national lottery programme. And so it wasn't a project, it was a bid. So we were doing a massive, massive proposal. We were setting up a whole organisation. It was with Richard Branson from Virgin. So I was on the phone with him and the Bank of England, and it's all very exciting. And I worked evenings and weekends, and we worked through the night. And people were getting on average 3 or 4 hours sleep, sleeping in the office. It was intense. It was really intense. And that lasted for some of them for 3 months. For me, it was about 4 weeks. And at the end of it, we had a huge celebration. So you can get that, or you can get research-based projects, which, you know, you can do with having a cup of tea and putting your feet up on the sofa, and you're just on the, you know, just reading documents and making notes. So it's the consultant is that you're going to get all the different experiences, and maybe not really know which one you're going to get tomorrow.
Really love the variation in between just enjoying a cup of tea while working to being crazy and sleeping 3 hours. It's just a great range of work.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very insightful answer too.
Anybody else got any chats? I've been asked to talk about overcoming self-doubt and gaining confidence. Do you want me to talk about that for a bit? How long have you got? Oh, can't see. I switched off my. I'm happy to stop now, guys. I think we've probably run over the hour.
Yeah, I think so too. But this was really enriching, honestly. Like 10 minutes is a small price to pay.
Okay. Right, well,
Yeah, so if there are any questions, make sure to leave it under the group recording or the events channel. And yeah, okay, thank you so much, Teresa.
Pleasure. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you
Hope you're having a fantastic time.
too.
All right.